All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program. My name is Marianne Burnetson, and I have the pleasure to serve as Interim Director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. And is that Charles that I see in the back? Hello, Charles. Welcome. I had just asked if you were going to be here tonight. Thank you for being here. We're excited to welcome you to the Okora for this timely and engaging conversation with our featured speaker, Hagar Chemali. This evening's program, hosted in collaboration with the Hamilton School for Classical and Civic Education, will explore the evolving relationship between artificial intelligence and U.S. national security. We're especially thrilled to host this conversation during our 20th anniversary year. For 2 decades, the Graham Center has prepared students for careers in civic engagement and public service, and tonight's discussion reflects that mission, bringing together UF students, faculty, staff, and community members to examine our nation's challenges, both at home and abroad. Senator Graham knew a thing or two about this. His national security legacy includes his service as chair of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee from 2001 to 2003, as well as his leadership in the joint congressional investigation into the September 11th attacks. His commitment to informed and engaged public service continues to guide the work we do here at the center. Now, before we move on to introductions, a few housekeeping items. Please silence your mobile devices. After the moderated discussion, we will have time for audience Q&A. For our online audience, you may submit your question through the YouTube chat. For those joining us in person, microphones will be circulating around the room. Please remember to speak into the microphone so our remote viewers can hear your question. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guests for this evening's discussion. First, our moderator, Dr. Jasmine McNeely, a professor in the Department of Media Production, Management, and Technology, and UF's College of Journalism and Communications. We're also welcome to honor our featured speaker and friend, Hagar Chemali. Hagar is a nationally recognized expert in foreign policy and national security with extensive experience across government, media, and the private sector. She previously served as spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence and has advised senior leaders on counterterrorism and global security issues. Today, she channels her government and media expertise into Oh My World, a YouTube series she created and hosts that helps young viewers especially understand this rapidly evolving landscape. It also helps me understand it. We're grateful to have us here with her this evening. Please join me in welcoming Jasmine and Hagar to the stage.
Thank you. That was such a nice introduction.
Thank you.
So nice to be here, everyone. Charlie in the corner. Yes.
Great. So I told you I was going to ask you about this, but you call yourself a news junkie.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you become a news junkie? And I especially am asking this because we have so many students in the hall right now and online, but how should students become news junkies as well?
Yeah, I've always been a news junkie, and I think it's because I was raised in a Middle Eastern family, and Middle Eastern family and mixed religion too, and I was always raised talking about geopolitics. It's very common for Middle Eastern families, and talking domestic politics too. And so I always had this interest in the news and news developments, and to this day, I still talk for hours with my dad about politics. We drive everybody up the wall over it. So I am a news junkie. It's becoming harder though. It's not because now you need, in order to get the full picture of something, you really have to read news from every single outlet and from everywhere and try to think critically and think, well, something's missing here. So I am still very much a news junkie, but maybe more traditional news, I guess.
So how do you go about finding out what's real and what's not so real?
Do you know that everyone asks me this question? Okay. It is the question I get the most often, and as time goes on, I would say that, well, I was going to say this year, but I meant 2025. Things got much more difficult in this regard because it's, I'll read an article, and because of my own lived experience in government or in media, I can see what's missing, or I can see when something is editorialized. So then if I know that, then I'll say, okay, well, I'll go to the wires and write the normal, so Reuters, AP, and Bloomberg, they will or should write the news as a report.
Sure.
So I'll go see that. But then I'm like, still something is missing. For example, maybe it's the local view is kind of there's something missing here. So then I'll try to get local press to see, well, what are they saying? And then you have to get different sides from local press. It can take a very long time. And if I look at something, and we're going to dive into AI, if I ask AI, I never take it on face value. In fact, I've had many times when I ask questions and the response will contradict itself in the answer, but then I'll go down that rabbit hole of researching and reading more reports. And I always say, for my own show, it's becoming more difficult, but I always say we do our homework, so you don't have to, but it's becoming increasingly difficult.
It's okay, so you've mentioned AI. So when you say artificial intelligence, AI, what are you talking about?
Yes, so I'm glad you asked me this, because usually when people think of AI, like the general lay person, we think of, really cool photos or videos on social media, right? You put your own photo in AI and it can spit you out looking like a Spartan or something like this, right?
Sure.
And that's fun too, obviously. But AI is really the ability for a machine to learn and to adapt and to take tasks, to learn, adapt, take tasks as though it mirrors or simulates cognitive thinking of a human. And so that's what it is. It is a machine, really, that simulates cognitive thinking, learns and adapts as it goes, and then executes whatever task it might be.
So when we're thinking about the many different kinds of AI systems, are there particular AI systems that worry you the most?
Yes.
Currently.
So it's more, if you have that kind of machine and you apply it in whether it's military use or computer systems or weaponry or in the hands of bad actors, there are a series of risks that I really see. So the first is the use of AI in war. And use of AI in war, and we can get into that of when you have humanoid robots, the idea of humanoid robots replacing troops. When you have what are called lethal autonomous weapon systems, laws, I think it's weird that they call them laws, but anyway, I'm not going to use that acronym because I think it's very disingenuous, very misleading. Lethal autonomous weapon systems, those are things like drones, for example, that are unmanned, that can go and strike a target and sometimes also identify targets and then take action with no human intervention, right? So that's the application of these in war is a risk and opens a whole door of questions on ethics and responsibility. You have certainly when it falls in the hands of nefarious actors or adversaries. When you have also the use of AI in cyber attacks. So if you have a machine that can learn and identify the vulnerabilities of another company or person or government security system, then it can monitor and watch, look for vulnerabilities. It could and try to hack that way. It could impersonate somebody as well. It could even voice impersonate somebody. It does voice impersonate somebody. So cyber attacks are a major risk in national security as posed by AI. You also have the threat posed by the fact that you have this information war in social media, in media in general, right? So AI that can distort the truth and distort historical narratives and lead people to believe something that's a completely different reality. So that's a significant risk for the way that could divide people and sow chaos and division. So that's one. And then the fourth risk I would say is the AI race that has been created because of the race to have the greatest technology, to be the fastest at developing that technology, to reach a certain scale in deploying that technology. That race it only heightens things further, particularly between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. That's really where you're seeing this race really be very heated, and we can get into that race more. But having any kind of race like that is also very risky. And then there are also benefits, right? And I don't want to, overlook those benefits, even in national security. Defense missile systems are largely guided by AI. So you have, for example, and there are lists. Sorry, I have my notes with me because some of these are very specific. The Iron Dome over Israel is largely guided by AI. German Mantis is another protective vehicle. Swedish LEDS 150. South Korea also has a defensive, something actually that surveils the border between South and North Korea, and that's AI that makes that possible. So you have a lot of applications as well, and that's just one example of them.
So a couple of things you mentioned, I think is worthy for the audience to really get a handle on. One, you talked about national security, and you worked for our federal government and in connection with our federal government with respect to national security. So when we're talking about national security, what is it that we are talking about? What's the umbrella?
Yeah, that's such a good question. No one's ever asked it to me that way. When you think of national security, you think of, on one hand, at the most base level, it's what protects you as a state, right? And so it is very America-centric, but when I'm talking about national security, what protects you as a state and what puts you out ahead of everyone else, and ahead of your adversaries, but also of everybody else. That is a very realist way of looking at things. It means that you believe, and American governments, regardless of party, have tended to be largely realist, also a little liberalist, but that means basically that we believe that states derive their power from military and economy, and that they make decisions based on that as well, of having the strongest economy and having the strongest military. And that has certainly guided the United States for decades, certainly since World War II. And then if you're interested, by the way, liberalism means you believe in alliances and collective security with your allies and so on. And so that's really what it is. But you also, with every chapter you have in life, and with whether sometimes it's based on administration and political party, but it's not, or leader, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just based on the certain era that you're in. National security will be defined by combating a certain set of threats, okay. And combating them effectively. And there's always, and it's funny when you think about it, because 20 years ago, the list of threats was very different than the list that you have now. And so combating them, being ahead of them, making sure that they don't pose some larger existential threat to your homeland physically, but also you as a state, your government, the power that you have globally.
Yeah. So how do governments, particularly U.S. government, how did it evaluate threats, especially those threats posed by innovations in technology?
So usually a threat is based on something, at least from the U.S. angle, and the U.S. government is based on identifying what is competing with you, and trying to be ahead of you in whatever way, right? It could be militarily, it could be economically. So competition, or something that is actively going after you, trying to undermine your democracy, trying to pursue terrorist attacks, trying to sow division among your people, trying to cause some kind of physical harm. All of these, because they get at the physical security of a state, and it's also societal security, right? Or just its political system. That's how you identify threats. And sometimes, by the way, there are threats that we used to identify that didn't really actually end up materializing, or because of some development, they kind of petered off. But I will tell you, for example, the way the U.S. government will rank threats, and this has been the case really for the last, I would say, 2 decades. The threats posed by the Chinese regime have always been one of the number one, if not the number one. Okay. And people always get confused by that because it's not always as much in the forefront in the press. But it guides, when you identify a threat, it ends up guiding how much of your resources you put toward combating that threat, right? One of the things I talk a lot about on air is the threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that is because inside government, the amount of resources, the amount of staff, the amount of people that it takes to combat the range of threats that come from the Iranian regime is infinite. It's not just the regime itself and how the regime supports terrorism or commits human rights abuses. It's also its terrorist proxies that it has across the region. It's also its attempts for cyber attacks against banks. It's also its assassination and kidnapping attempts around the world against dissidents, including here in the United States. So it's it ends up, it'll end up informing also how you end up structuring an office. But I can tell you this, up until Putin annexed Crimea, the Russian government and Putin was identified as a threat, but not to the extent that it became since 2014, for sure. Now it's, if not, maybe the second or third, if you were to list them.
So what kind of skills and experience are good for like threat assessment within the like nation state context then? If we're thinking about, particularly for students, but everybody else, like who needs to know what and how?
So there, some of it is international studies, right? And I would say history is the biggest piece of this. I always say this to people that I'm a student of political history. And when people don't identify a threat, it's because they're not aware of maybe a dictator that behaved similarly in the past. It's one of the things that we always said about, when we think about how to address Putin and the invasion of Ukraine, and if you look at World War II, appeasing a dictator never works. Because they only, if you come to some kind of agreement and they walk away with a piece of land, it only incentivizes them to continue invading. And we know this from history. And you'd be surprised how often policymakers don't always think of that, because policymakers are a mix of, you'll have people like me where this is their profession, and they studied it deeply, and then they continue to study it and get smart on these things. But then you have political leadership, and political leadership that's not really generally their expertise. Sometimes, but not always. And so I find understanding political history and also understanding how things are abroad and how things play out around the world is critical, because you'll see here all the time, here and in Europe as well, you'll see sometimes certain decisions or moves that don't make sense if they really actually understood the threat at hand, and if understanding how things are abroad. So having that kind of global view of things, living abroad, learning different languages, putting yourself in the shoes abroad. This is and political history, and then I guess experience. It grows after a while.
That's great. And to think about national security and political history, I'm looking at current issues coming up, and so this is 2026, and we have elections coming up, midterm elections. What do you see on the horizons with respect to national security, artificial intelligence, mis and disinformation with regard to our upcoming elections and elections around the globe as well?
Yeah, it's a lot packed in that one.
Yeah.
Because some of that is domestic too, right?
Right.
And so without going too far into like how, polling of the current president will feed into the election. So that is very relevant, right? And certainly as it relates to the economy and inflation and so on. So that will definitely play out. But what's so interesting is that forever we've always said that foreign policy and national security, and I would they overlap very much, doesn't dictate an election. And it's actually one of the first times you really see foreign policy decisions really shaping the political parties and how they view things. And they're both parties are really in a metamorphosis on this. So for example, on the Democrat side, there's a fundamental shift in how a lot of Democrats view U.S. support for Israel. And that is shaping how people, to the extent where it shapes how people vote. But there's a reckoning that hasn't been made yet, right? There's still this view of, okay, big tent, but the Democrats are losing certain communities. So Jewish communities. They've also some not, but Jewish communities now lately with Maduro, and you had a lot. I'm sure you saw protests saying, that protect Maduro or whatever. Again, an example of not really adequately identifying a threat. That's isolating Venezuelans, isolating a huge chunk actually of Latin Americans and those in the U.S. And that's going to continue, right? So you see that, and you see Democrats trying to reckon with this, with like how do they think of the world? Because that's what that's about. It's not about Israel. It's not about Maduro. It's the world view. And it's on the Republican side, it's a chasm between isolationists and neocon view, which a neocon view tends to be more about a strong United States, a very powerful United States, a US that influences how things are around the world, backed by strong military and economy and threats, or credible threats, versus isolationism really doesn't see the value in that. Is, well, why should we give weapons to Israel? Why should we bomb the Houthis to protect freedom of navigation in the waters, right? Like it's a total, so they are also coming to that. So how much this plays out in the midterms is hard to see. Is hard to say. I will tell you though, on the AI front, we do know that that nefarious actors, particularly the Chinese, Russian, and Iranian regimes, used a lot of AI. They've become much more sophisticated since the last election. This stuff moves very quickly to sow divisions, to spread lies, to spread disinformation, to distort narratives. For example, one of the most famous ones in the run-up to the presidential election was related to Vice President Kamala Harris, and there was a video that was shared of her. It was something like a month out from the election, and that video was proven to have been created by Russian bots. And the video had her saying something out, like, I can't remember what she was saying, but something completely absurd and ridiculous. But what happens when the only reason that was identifiable was because these regimes were weak at crafting these videos at that time, and we were able to quickly identify that fast enough to tell people that this is in fact a deep fake. But those nefarious actors are becoming much more sophisticated at it, and the speed at which it spreads on social media is also becoming more and more terrifying and much more harder to keep up with.
So they're becoming better, but also the technology is becoming great. So what are the implications for a technology that some people consider a learning technology as it increases in getting information and feedback, it makes better choices, makes better video, audio, whatever the case may be?
It should, in theory, right? In theory, it should. All these models and AI platforms should learn and get better as they go on. But I would ask all of you: how many of you have used ChatGPT or any AI platform and gotten a wrong answer, or answers that contradict each other, right? Okay, so the beauty of everyone raising their hands, and this is pretty much everybody, is that that you're all honest, but B, that you recognize that, because we're all going to use AI to research. I mean, how can you not? It's remarkable, this tool. It's supposed to make things much more scalable and efficient and quick. It's amazing. But the fact that you're able to recognize that maybe something is contradictory, or that something makes you question, well, that might not sound right, so I'm going to go and research this on my own. That is a very good sign. That's harder to do. And I will tell you this because I pride myself on, even when my mom, for example, will send me something that'll be like, wait a minute, oh my God, did you see this? And it's from Facebook or something, and I'm like, no, this is totally fake. But there are a lot of times now where I'll see someone I trust who, and I used to say this, by the way, I didn't say this time, but I used to say that one of the ways where I would assure myself I was getting accurate information was to follow certain leaders or influencers or thought leaders or think tankers or scholars whom I trust to say, like, oh, well, they're sharing this, so clearly, right? But they're lately now where I'll see them share something inadvertently that, and I sit there, they'll say, I'll give you an example. One was someone was sharing the image of no protests taking place on college campuses against or in favor of to side with the Iranian people during this awful time. Sure. And that is true. There were very few protests, but they were sharing images that were clearly taken in the summer. And so I wanted to share that, but I was like, no, that's clearly while I know this is true, it's clear that this is an image taken in the summer and not now, because one of them was in New York and I was in New York and there's snow on the ground. And so, but how many people are going to go through that thought process? And also how exhausting it makes it, and this is one of the, and I hope I don't jump on this one, but this is how there's a phenomenon that has been created by this called the liar's dividend, where you can't tell anymore what's the truth. And if you can't tell what's the truth anymore, then the person or side that typically lies or typically tries to obfuscate or uses deep fakes to mislead people, when they are pointed to and someone says, well, you did this, and here's the proof, that person can say, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. That looks like fake news to me. And no one can know anymore. It's hard unless you have things that are verified. And, right? That whole world that we're living in, it makes it very difficult, especially on social media, and I do want to share a statistic with you that will blow your mind, but is that on social media, people are 70% more likely to click on fake news and a deep fake than they are on the truth. I'm going to read a few things for you that are. So there was a 680% rise. There's 680% rise in deepfake activity year over year in 2024. Deepfake videos increased by 550% between 2019 and 2024. Voice deepfakes rose 680% last year. Scientists calculated that the average false story takes about 10 hours to reach 1,500 users on X versus about 60 hours for the truth. And on average, false information reaches 35% more people than true news. So when you apply it to, upcoming elections, or just general life, you start to wonder if we're all living in kind of distorted realities, and that's really scary.
Yeah. So to combat this kind of misinformation, deep fakes, many states have attempted to pass or were on the road to passing their own AI legislation. And also some municipalities have AI legislation just for their borders of their city or municipality. Could you talk a bit about the state of particularly federal regulation of AI and AI products perhaps, and what's on the horizon for that in the national security context?
Yeah, so just to give some context, Biden passed an executive order, while he was in office, that was meant to create some kind of set of safety standards-ish around AI. And the fact was that it was an executive order, so that's why I say ish, because there was only so much an administration can do on this issue, when really what's needed is regulation coming from Congress and laws. So he passed this executive order, and that executive order, the main point of it was to encourage research into safety, having these companies publish what their findings on safety in AI, putting more money to hiring AI experts, things of this kind, giving kind of guidelines to social media platforms on what to do, how to discern AI. Some of that was taken, for example, you might see on Instagram, for example, there's something that will say, this is AI. You have to check that box proactively, and then sometimes, and if you don't, sometimes the system will notice that you have AI in there and tell you, it'll note it for you, but not always. But that's not really a law. So anyway, Trump, when he came to office, struck that executive order along with many other executive orders, and then in December he put out an executive order just now, 2 months ago, saying basically the point of that executive order was to prevent states from passing their own individual laws related to AI, which, by the way, is super not Republican. It's a little bit odd because Republicans tend to believe in states having greater power, right? Having more authority and agency over their laws. But I always say this about the Trump administration: it's very inconsistent in a lot of ways. Invade Venezuela, we might not invade Greenland. So that is the argument that the administration is making, is to not stifle AI development and innovation. But states that are passing laws, these laws are really actually largely about protecting children, and protecting children or women from, having their face plastered on some kind of pornographic video, having children used also for photos and videos and so on. So it's very problematic. So that said, to answer your question on what do you do based on this, is you need, first of all, there needs to be regulation. There needs to be a wide range of regulation, actually. It can't just be one thing. There is, for example, there's a law out there by, that's why I brought my notes, Senator Rounds and Senator Gillibrand, called the Cyber Conspiracy Modernization Act, but that's specifically to strengthen cybersecurity defense. So that's to combat the threat of the cyber attacks that I mentioned. When it comes to social media, this is my own opinion, is that social media platforms should either be regulated or somehow incentivized, because they might not end up getting regulated, incentivized to implement in their own systems verification for photo and video. So what that means is there are a lot of software systems out there. For one of them, for example, is TruePic. A friend of mine is over there. TruePic is a company that verifies photo and video. So you take it, and then there's some kind of watermark. Watermark, I think it's like on the front end and the back end, right? In the blockchain. This is not my expertise, but anyway, proving when the photo or video was taken, the date, the time, and the location. Okay. And so if at the very least, if social media companies aren't going to require that, and they don't have an interest in requiring that, at the very least, if you take a photo through Instagram or TikTok or video or whatever, they could give you, the user, the option of saying, you see, this is proven. So me in Iran right now, what I'm showing you that's happening on the ground, it is proven, it is verified through that software system. But given the statistic I just told you about how people are more likely, 70% more likely to click on fake news, why would the social media platform have that interest? They are a business. They are not mission focused at all. But that's why I say there has to be some regulation or incentive to make them do this. But they have to do it. They have to make it so that the user can discern between something AI and not. For freedom of speech issues, they're not going to ban AI related things, and they shouldn't. There are some very fascinating historical videos and biblical videos I found. Like went down that rabbit hole. It's fascinating. But they need to be able to discern. And then the last one I would say is when it comes to war. And ironically, I'm less concerned about. I mean, it's very scary if you think of how war could look, sure, how AI could look in war. Geoffrey Hinton, who is, like, they call him the AI godfather. He is one of the major developers of AI. He worked at Google, and then he stepped down famously in May of 2023. To raise awareness of the dangers of AI if they're not regulated. And he painted a very scary view of war if AI is allowed to develop as at the pace that it's going at without any kind of rules or guidelines. Which, for example, imagine if wars are fought by humanoid robots, then there's no limit to the destruction, right? If you're just fighting other robots. Yes, maybe you save human lives, but there's no limit to that destruction. Or what if it comes across a human, right? That humanoid robot is in a country that doesn't have humanoid robots. And you're the innocent person trying to convince a robot that you're actually innocent. But you happen to fit all the measures of that target, right? They're looking for male, this age, this build, wearing green, whatever right?
Sure.
And so it's a very scary type of view. And the same goes for the lethal autonomous weapon systems. These are systems that are where it's an unmanned drone, right, that can strike a target. But what makes them different and scarier is that they, in order for an adversary not to jam it or not to hack it and make that drone do something else or steal that drone so that they get the intelligence or whatever, these systems go without any human intervention. So you, the creator, tell the drone, I want you to go into Afghanistan, and this is the type of target you're looking for. Now go. And there's no human intervention, because if you could intervene as a human, then so could that other government, rogue group, non-state actor, and so on. Mm-hmm. So you have to rely on the judgment of a robot to decide what is a target, right? But the fact is that to get back to the point about what to do, is that people are talking about this on the war piece actively, and the AI godfathers are out there, and there's, they signed an open letter 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, and then at the beginning of the UN General Assembly they also came out. We could talk about the effectiveness of the UN later, but at least they came out and said, AI is a real threat, and we're really worried about this, and we're certainly worried about it in particular as it relates to the ethics and responsibility in war, and we need, they called it like AI red lines. And so there is some thought put in, and again, we could talk about the efficacy of international law also later, but the fact is that there's some real thought process into the need to create these red lines.
And yet, at one time, it was kind of speculative, AI, killer robots, war, and yet now there are partnerships forming between defense companies and AI companies. So what does that mean for the future of war, defense, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so there's one partnership in particular in the US that has a lot of people talking, and it's a defense company called Anduril and OpenAI. And so this one, there are pros and cons to this partnership. So the pro is, if you are in an AI race with the Chinese regime, and then you definitely want to win that race. And you have no choice whether or not you want to be in that race, and you might not want to be in that race, knowing that we might face this dystopian world, but you have no choice. If you have an adversary that is trying to pursue that race and trying to enhance it's not just its military capabilities, by the way, on this race. China is investing in AI heavily for a wide range of reasons, right? For economic output and for scale and for efficacy and its workforce and certainly for military. And there is a reason why Putin said publicly that the person who rules AI will rule the world. It's a little scary, but he did say that. It's not going to be him, though. Don't worry. So that's when I'm losing my train of thought. But that said, when you have this race, you have to have your military. You have to have your military up to snuff. You can't fall behind. So that kind of partnership helps ensure that the U.S. is going to have the most advanced AI technology. At the same time, if you have, like I said, those lethal autonomous weapons, let's say that weapon targets an innocent civilian somewhere, and then who's liable or what's liable? Right. Is it OpenAI? Let's say it's one of the weapons that was created out of this. Is it OpenAI for creating that software system and the program and the robot machine learning system? Is it Anduril for creating that weapon? Is it the U.S. government, the user of it? And then what other whole slew of issues and questions does it open? So there's that. There's also a lot of concern in this partnership about, one of the things this partnership is meant to do is improve battlefield communication. And that is very important. As an American, I want our troops to be able to communicate very successfully on the ground, and in a way that is not hackable. By the way, this is one of the ways that Ukraine had so much success in finding Russian targets, because Russian troops were just really lazy and really stupid in how they communicated. And the Ukrainians would find them and target them this way because they were able to hack their systems. So this partnership is looking into this, and the military, our U.S. Army, put out a memo in September saying, we actually have a lot of fundamental concerns about the security of not only how these private organizations are researching and figuring out how to reform this, but we don't know who's going to have access to it, who's going to be able to get in the middle of it. Is this security tough enough to prevent a hacker, and so on. So pros and cons to this partnership.
So, by the way, if you have questions, we're going to have a Q&A period really soon. But one last question for you. What can just regular people be doing or thinking about with respect to, of course, artificial intelligence, but the connection between artificial intelligence and their part in national security? So you mentioned things like social media, a little bit of media literacy, but what can regular people do?
Yes. get a flip phone and cancel your social media accounts. I joke about that, except my poor teenager is definitely, I have 3 kids and the oldest is a teenager, and he is definitely getting a flip phone when he's like 18. So I am that mom. But media literacy is the most important for sure, but and to expand on that, it's really, it's about thinking critically, ultimately. That should be the root of everything, by the way, is if you see something, and I hate to say that because like I said, it's exhausting to think that everything that you could be seeing on social media or reading might not be real or might not, or it's a very annoying and unfortunate world that we're living in, but I do believe that it will become so annoying that it will turn people off ultimately at some point, and these social media platforms are going to have to adjust and adapt. I know it turns me off. Seeing anything that's fake just drives me up the wall. So a lot of it is about questioning and wondering before you share something, before you assume something is right, before you think that photo is accurate, is saying, well, wait a minute, like, could this be real? I gave that example of the protests where like, well, they're showing this protest, but like it's winter over there. Could this really be? Or when you're seeing it abroad, and by the way, AI can be helpful in actually identifying the fake as well, in scanning the internet and being like, actually, that was not, and you have a lot in national security is, no, that wasn't taken in Syria in 2015. That image was taken in Yemen in 2009, right? Like there's the AI can also be helpful in that regard. But it takes, kind of being a step ahead and being as aware as possible. So it's exhausting. It takes a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Awesome. So we're going to open it up to Q&A. If you have questions, please raise your hand, and folks with a microphone will come to allow you to ask.
Hi, how are you? My name is Christina. Thank you for speaking with us today. I hope this isn't cheating, but you did come to our class earlier. And while you were there, during your conversation, you briefly mentioned that you think Ukraine is one of the main actors who is using AI as warfare, and that their development has been intensive and widespread. So I would love to hear a little bit about why you think that.
Yeah. So Ukraine is such a fascinating example because Ukraine became one of the most advanced in using AI in war, and in particular in drones, and the capability of those drones, because they had no choice. They weren't, this is not a military that is as big, certainly, as the Russian military. And we could go on as how the Russian military continues to feed troops from prisons and from North Korea and so on. But so they had to be, the Ukrainians had to be very scrappy. They don't have fighter jets that can go bomb in Russia easily. They don't have, they didn't for a long time have the defense missile capabilities. They had to be very scrappy on the ground. And so this forced them and their engineers to really come up with these fascinating and remarkably advanced drones guided by AI. And an example of that is in June of last year, you had Ukrainian quadricopters, which are basically drones that look like mini helicopters, go into Russia. And those drones were given specific targets to hit military bases and weapons depots, military targets in Russia. As soon as they crossed into the border, Russia jammed the sensors of these drones. But because they were guided already by AI and having it was like a backup AI, basically, a backup system that said, no matter what happens to you, this is where you're going and this is where you're striking. And so that's what it did. So now in the context of Ukraine, and I have some more statistics on Ukraine and how it's become, for example, in 2024 alone, it produced over 1.7 million drones. That's in the middle of the war. That's great. It's amazing. And it's actually one of the things that President Zelensky, in his dealings with Trump, has tried to offer as something that Ukraine can offer in exchange for what they need from the United States, which at this point is mostly fighter jets. And he's saying, we'll give you drones, right? We'll partner on all the things that we developed, and we'll make those drones for you. And by the way, that's great. Now, one of the things that's fascinating to watch Ukraine in what they had, for example, one there was an interview I saw with a group of engineers where they had an AI drone follow a target. And so it followed the target and then struck when it was pretty certain that that was the intended target, right? And so for Ukraine, we applaud. And it is something that's laudable, that's exciting and laudable to see an underdog take on a behemoth like Russia in this way and being so smart about it. But when I saw that, I kept thinking to myself, like, what if the Iranian regime comes up with the same ability? What if a terrorist group figures this out, right? Like if engineers could be scrappy enough to figure this out, what happens when you have terrorist groups do the same thing, or non-state actors, or terrifying adversaries and nefarious actors around the world? It becomes scarier on another level because they're not going to go by the same rules. It won't matter to them that it's a military target. They'll go after a civilian target too. So that's why I said that Ukraine is really, it's like they've taken it to the next level, and it's exciting to see, and it's a positive, but it also makes you question, like, okay, but we know you're going after military targets. We have to come up with guidelines and rules to ensure and try and ensure, in a world where people aren't really following international guidelines, but to try and set red lines so that nefarious actors don't use it to further their nefarious goals.
Next question. Back right there. Yeah. With the blue hoodie, or.
Hi, my name's Omkar. Thank you again for coming to speak with us. I wanted to ask about something related to the discussion before about how social media is being filled with lots of misinformation, as you were discussing. But I wanted to ask about what your opinion was on a sort of similar hypothetical wherein if someone hypothetically were to institute a system for AIs publishing true information on social media, but in such a way that it made it seem as though one particular perspective were more represented than it actually were, but only using actual factual information and not using any misinformation. What would your opinion be on the ethicality of that sort of scenario?
Yeah, that's, to be honest with you, that's just, that's media too, right? Like the media will produce, all kinds of media outlets will produce ranges of videos and stories, and it's based on, or should be based on, facts, right? But many of them do, and so if they use AI to explain it better, right? For example, you see a lot of content creators and media outlets, they will, if they're talking about something historical, they'll take you to an AI image of that historical moment. Maybe it's a certain war, or it's the room of, you're talking about communism, so you have some kind of image, I'm making this up as I go along, of Karl Marx and him at his desk writing, his book back then. So, that's actually a great use of AI, because you're using AI to engage people, to communicate something, to teach them, to educate on top of it. Which is, by the way, why, and I hope I don't sound super anti-AI, that ship has sailed. If you wanted to be anti-AI, you couldn't anyway. But AI has all these great practical uses. That's one of them. Another is the scale at which you could have, by the way, for example, educational videos of that kind. But the question is trust at the end of the day, right? And so the issues, for example, that in this disinformation war that I was talking about, the types of things, and it's actually, when I give you the list of them, it's a little bit scary, that AI could do in this world. And then I want to go back to you to see how we can discern from the good AI, or AI used well in a good and practical way versus nefariously, is first where you have increased personalized and automated propaganda. So that one is where disinformation is meant to spread effectively to completely manipulate public opinion. The second is distortion of historical narratives, so that a content that's used to create false or altered representation of historical events, so that it also, again, sways people to think a certain way. Sophisticated psychological operations. So sometimes there are AI-driven psychological operations meant to target certain groups And given how easy it is on social media to target certain groups, with ads or whatever, that what it could do and how that could sow division or incite violence, amplify gender-based violence and deepfakes, and that goes for everybody. It hits women in particular because of women's faces being used on sexual or pornographic images, but also imagine, for example, a political candidate, any political candidate, and somebody creates an AI video of them committing some kind of crime, saying something racist, whatever, and this exists already, and you have a whole swath of population that's going to believe that, right? And then just general heightened disinformation dynamics and what that could do to societies and markets and so on. So my question back to you is, you can have media outlets or content creators or education leaders use AI to create videos or content or anything to actually share something, and they can say all they want in their caption that this is all created by facts and here are the sources. And I do that for my own videos, by the way, on YouTube. But who's to say who's adjudicating this? Who's right? And that gets to your point about what we can all do as members of a society, is to see and build trust and say, like, well, that outlet does this, and from what I can tell from my own research, what they're doing is true, and it takes that, but it does take that step for that to happen.
Anyone over? We have a question.
And by the way, you can ask questions. We can talk about other national security issues as well. I know it's like an insane. It's been an insane year. It's like January 65th on foreign policy. So if you want to talk other foreign policy things too, we can discuss.
Hi, yeah, my question is more focused on, you talked a lot about how industry and government interplay to carry the narrative of what's real and what isn't real, especially when it comes to the publishing of deepfakes. What do you think academia's responsibility, especially from a research perspective, is to contribute to combating the abuse of deepfakes to spread misinformation?
Yeah, so the issue where we're lacking in regulation and lacking in guidelines or those AI red lines, for example, this is one thing where, so first of all, academia, and I know from here because we spoke earlier today, I understand that there's the greatest supercomputer, I'm going to mangle this, greatest supercomputer here at University of Florida. That is quite a feat, that's pretty impressive. But then given your own experience building that and academic experience in building it, honing it, perfecting it, seeing what it can do, the view from the academic world, and I think this in general, by the way, regardless of whether it's applied to AI or other foreign policy or national security issues, is priceless in warning of the threats, in saying, like, this is a potential threat, and so therefore I would advise government to craft a law that does this, or craft a red line that prevents this specific thing that those in government just might not be seeing, right? Like if you're a legislator, if you're a congressperson or a senator on Capitol Hill, you're not using AI beyond maybe the occasional ChatGPT or Googling something. So hearing from academia is paramount to that, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. My question is not so much AI related; it's more so regarding your time at the NSC.
Oh yeah.
You were, more than likely being briefed by senior IC professionals during your time there. Mm-hmm. How much of that analysis from senior IC members is lost from the time it comes to you to the time it turns into actual foreign policy? Because it feels like there's a lot of stuff the IC is probably telling administrations, based on their own analysis, that never ever makes it into foreign policy. Whether it just feels like a lot of it is becoming politicized, despite the IC historically being super apolitical.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that intersection between IC analysis and turning it into actual foreign policy, despite the possible political ramifications that may come with it.
Oh, I love this question. So first, I will say I have enormous respect for the intelligence community, and my own experience with them have never been anything but super impressive. And with every intel analyst I've ever worked with, the US government is so lucky to have all of them. And actually what I witnessed was not a length of time issue for an intelligence assessment to make its way into informing a foreign policy decision. It's a deliberate decision by policymakers to ignore or accept it. And I witnessed it over and over and over again. And especially at the NSC, actually, because the NSC, that's the National Security Council at the White House. The NSC is where foreign policy decisions are really come out of that body. And your job is to really corral the interagency, get different perspectives and views and so on. And then the cabinet or president will make a decision on whatever national security issue it is, and the NSC has to execute it, right? And so because you're that center, you get all this, you get briefed by the IC, they are a key part of every single deliberation. So they are in the room with every major foreign policy decision. But I can't tell you how many times they would give an assessment, and I can't give examples, but I can tell you how many times they gave an assessment that turned out to be accurate, that at the time, policymakers were like, no, you have this wrong. And they always had it right. They always had it right. And it would always play out a year later or 2 years later or 5 years later. And I would say oh, they were right, And I think it's because policymakers have this, they have this view in mind, and policymakers are very good at putting everything in a box, being like, oh, this is our end goal. And so if that's our ultimate goal, then working backwards, what are the policies that we're going to pursue? And we always make it sound really good and really presentable publicly. And when the intel community comes in and pees all over that and is like, actually, no, none of what you're going to do is going to work because this is what's going to happen. Or if you do this, this is likely what's going to happen, and it's a negative view. Policymakers are like, no, I refuse to accept that. I'm going to take my bets, place my bets. And so that's when you see it not play out. Now, you're right, there has been some politicization as well, particularly lately. Under Trump 1 as well, right? Where the president had publicly, said, well, I don't believe in the assessments coming from the intel community on Ukraine, for example, and other assessments, and that's it's a shame. And I mentioned this in one of the classes earlier today that of the workforce in government, I would say, I believe about 90% are civil servants. And whatever your political view is, of that 90%, 99.9% of them really do work with the idea of the mission at hand, not regardless of who they voted for. And it, for me, it was an honor. That's why, and I believe very much in civil service and public service. But I do think that the intel community is only going to grow. It's also, by the way, for first time, we're going to talk careers tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I think here. For post-undergrad is a great place to go for jobs because they take many people and they recruit and they train you, and then it opens up many other jobs, many other doors in government or in private security and stuff.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
And I'm happy to stay after too, by the way. Yeah. I mean, as I tell people, I could talk to a wall, so it's my favorite activity.
Thank you for the talk today. I guess one question that I had is related to how government policies are issued regarding AI. I mean, we have all been told that government is slow when it comes to long-lasting policies, and you've just talked about how certain policies have been changed under presidents by executive order. Where do you think that long-term AI policies should come from, and how do you think those should be implemented effectively without going too far into the realm of freedom of speech or freedom of personal security? Sure.
If government were to function properly, and I would say the system has been broken for 2 decades, but if things, or maybe 1 decade, if government were to function properly, it really should come. Congress is really who should lead on the regulation and legislation and regulation. Well, legislation, and then the bodies of government that are the most relevant should help with the regulation. But usually you also have offices within the federal government, the executive branch, working with members on Capitol Hill to formulate the best policies, and they shouldn't be partisan in nature. They should be based on what makes the most sense, and what, for sure advances innovation and while protecting American citizens. But so that process is a bit broken. At the moment, there are a lot of interests at heart, and you see it play out, right? I mean, social media platforms aren't going to do a thing now, nor AI companies aren't going to do a thing now. They're funding inauguration days and things like that. And they knew exactly what they were doing by doing that. So it's that system is broken, and that idea of having interests and special interests, it muddies it. And then when you have a Congress that they can't come to an agreement on anything, even when things that, and this is, by the way, on both sides, where they refuse to get together and come up with something that makes sense. You'll see bills maybe introduced by two people who agree to work on something together, or maybe they're the co-chairs of they're the chair and ranking member of a certain committee or whatever, so it makes sense. But on the whole, you never want to see one side. The view is they don't want to give a win to the other side. So they're gonna block legislation. They're gonna, unless it's a crisis or unless they have to address it in that moment. And when it comes to AI, I kind of liken it to the nuclear arms race, which sounds a little bit dramatic, but it's not that dramatic when you think about the arms race for nuclear technology, the fact that we used it and then it was regulated and then treaties were enforced, and that's how it feels a little bit with this one, that we're playing catch up, and with all this dysfunction, you're not going to have common sense regulation until something happens, until something proves it to be a crisis. That's my view. That's an opinion.
Just wanted to thank you both for tonight. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Hagar. We appreciate everything you've shared with us this evening, and thank you for your time. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. I would be remiss if I didn't explain who Charles is when I acknowledged him earlier. Charles Kennedy is the new director of the Hamilton School, and just want to say thank you so much for being here, for co-sponsoring, and looking forward to working with you in the future as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a wonderful program.
Thank you.
On a timely, interesting, and somewhat scary subject.
Yeah, I know, sorry.
Fascinating subject. We thank you very much, and we thank the Graham Center for partnering.
Thank you, sir. And then the final thing I wanted to note is Hagar said she'd be happy to stay afterward, and we still have some refreshments in the back. Thank you to Cheryl and her team for organizing that. Also, Surya, our student assistant here, is taking RSVPs for the coffee chat tomorrow morning with students only. So that is your time to come and connect with Hagar and get all your questions answered. Thank you, Surya. And I believe that is it. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
And we have stickers. I have stickers for Oh My World.
On the other side of the table, of
as
the
you
wall on the
leave.
table.
Yes, so take a sticker, but then click subscribe on YouTube. Do not forget. If you take a sticker, you must subscribe.
Thanks, Hagar.
Oh My World on YouTube. Yeah.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.